Can I ask you a question? Do you believe in Christianity? Like, you consider yourself a Christian. Is it that you see the value in Christianity, the symbolism, the culture, the religion, or is it that you believe the Bible is divine, that Christ was a real person who died and was resurrected,
Yeah, so that's
so
not
on
an
and so
or,
forth?
right? It's an and.
Yeah, it's
It's
not an
an
or, right?
and,
That
right?
makes
So
sense. Well, yeah. I mean, is it or is it both, or is it one
no,
or
it's
the other for
both.
you?
So
It sounds like it's
it's
both.
both,
Cool.
and it's both for an important reason. It's both because one of
Yeah.
the problems that we've seen in the modern age is that they say something like, let's say the structure that comes in stories, like it's an interesting thing, it's an interesting fiction, and so they want to project it out of the world. But my contention is that
Mhm.
symbolism happens. That is, that the very happen of an event is perceived through the lens by which the Bible stories were written. There's the very fact that you can conceive of the flow of time, you can cut it into sections that you care about and attend to, is the same structure as the Bible. So the idea that those things that are the highest form of the pattern, let's say the Bible stories, or let's say the story of Christ,
Mhm.
that it's so completely crazy that it would happen. It's like, why is it crazy
Yeah.
that it would happen if it's the pattern of reality? And even though it has aspects to it which look at the outset to be miraculous, they nonetheless point to the very structure of being. And so that's why, for me, it has to fit all together, especially in the case of the story of Jesus, which is that that's the way we understand it. It's like the way that C.S. Lewis talks about it. He says that, the story of Jesus is the myth come true. That is, it's the mythological structure that actually fully embeds itself in the world of experience. And that's why it looks the way that it does.
I didn't bring this topic up before the call when I mentioned the list of topics we would talk about, but it just occurred to me, and you can we don't have to go into this, but I can't help myself but ask you about religion and what's behind your religious belief. Can we go
Sure,
there,
that's fine.
or is that are you
No,
sick
no,
of
no,
that?
no.
Are you
I'm
sick
always
of?
happy.
I don't want to be. And I can edit
No,
out
no,
this
that's fine.
this little talk right here, but I don't want to catch you off guard. Do you mind if I press
Sure,
you?
go
Like,
ahead.
I don't want to take up the whole call with this, but okay, because I can't help myself. Um, so here's my question: how do you know that that the creation of the Bible was divine and that the stories are a reflection of reality? How do you know that's the case and that it's not the case that humans wrote it over generation, and that the history of humanity over the last 2,000 years is that we transition from oral storytelling and oral note taking, and we eventually transcribed that into writing, and that could explain the acceptance of, because one of the arguments is, well, how could such and such stories be accepted if they were written by humans? People would reject them. And the counter to that was, well, we transitioned from like oral history storytelling to written. So sorry for the long-windedness, but how do you know that the Bible was divinely inspired and not just written by
It is
humans
is
and
written by
made up?
human.
How do you know it's not made up stories?
Well, okay. The first thing to say is that, what do you
You're
mean?
sick.
No,
You're
what do
probably
you
sick of
mean?
being.
Like, I'm not sure what you totally mean by made up story. So
What I mean,
let me say
is
it,
that
let me say it
I
clearly.
yeah.
What I mean is that there is a manner to which we care about made up stories to a certain level.
Mhm.
But that level has a limit. There's a limit to the extent to which we care about made up stories. We
Mhm.
tend to care about stories that consolidate our identity, that consolidate
Yep.
our place in the world. Those stories are not made up. They are transmitted. And in their transmission, it is possible that they change, but they're not someone who one day sat down and made up a story. They are a memory that gets contracted over time, right? So it's like the memory gets
Mhm.
contracted for reasons that we could talk about. But the idea that this is someone who sat down and made up these stories, it's like
Mhm.
that's true of Star Wars, but Star Wars does not found civilizations. I mean, people like Star Wars, but
Yeah.
it doesn't found civilization. So stories that are told to be the origin of people, They
Yeah.
are the bringing together of memory and transmission, and express the reason why we exist together. And so the Bible stories, they necessarily have to be that, not just this Bible stories, but the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Greek myths and all of these stories, they're not people who came up with them. That's not how any of this works. It is people who are telling stories that they've heard and are retelling them in a way that can be understood by the people to who they're speaking. Does that make sense? Like, so both in an oral culture, that's it. That's true, but it's the same thing that happens when you inscribe them in a text.
Why? So let me try to come at this question a different way. I don't know if I'm probably doing a poor job articulating it. So another way for me to kind of approach it is, how do you know Jesus Christ was a divine person that was killed and resurrected? Like, whether, or the talk, like my question is really, how do you know that the supernatural things described in the Bible happened? And I would imagine that your response, I don't want to speak for you, but I would imagine your response is something along the lines of, if we accept the premise that the Bible is divine, then that as a premise absolutely that can explain how something supernatural can happen. But let me not answer the question for you. So how do you know these supernatural things, or whether we're talking about the resurrection, you name it, how do you know that happened if it's supernatural?
So the first thing to say is that the purpose of telling a story of a miracle is not to prove that it happened. This is a very important aspect of it. It's a very important aspect because it's like the modern materialist and the modern secularist has completely forgotten the reason why we remember things and the reason why we say things. It's like the reason why we recount miracles is because of what they mean, and also because of what they afford, and not because of we are trying to prove that it happened. And so the first reason why I care about the miracles that are described in the Bible is because of what they afford, is because of what they reveal about reality and what they make possible to participate in.
I have no doubt that they have incredible lessons. My question is just, do you believe in them or not? And your answer, I'm not clear on your answer.
My answer is yes. My answer is I do believe it.
Did it? But in terms of, did they?
They happened, and the way they're described is the best way you could describe them for us to care about them and remember them.
So my question is, how do you know they happened?
How do you know that anything happened before your life, Jake?
Here's how.
How do you know that anything happened outside of your own experience?
Well, yeah. So we have an accepted tradition of
we have an accepted tradition. Just repeat after you because it's the same.
Yeah. We have. Sure. So
you trust certain authorities to consolidate reality for you.
Hold on.
And you accept what those authorities have given you to be history, to be the experience outside of yours. All experience outside of yours is mediated by trust.
No, I'll be really concise because I've thought about this, and I think that the way that we know, let's say, for example, that George Washington was the first president, or that Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean, or that the Mayans had this thriving civilization, is that we have a certain threshold for evidence. And if we find a fossil of a dinosaur and then another fossil, we put them together and we say we think dinosaurs existed. And so I'm not a scientist, but the scientific process dictates that if you meet a certain threshold of evidence, and that evidence has like hard defined criteria, then we know that dinosaurs existed, that the earth is round, that Christopher Columbus, all these things. And so that's the answer to your question of how do we know something existed before the lifetime? There's a threshold of evidence with the parameters set by the scientific method. And if that threshold is met, that's how we form scientific conclusions. And if you say to me, hey, I think 500 years ago, human beings had wings and could fly, I would say, show me the evidence. And and maybe you could show me evidence, like maybe there's some drawing somewhere, but unless that evidence met the threshold prescribed by the scientific method, I would say it falls short. I don't buy it. I don't believe you that people could fly.
I'm not sure how to answer your question.
Yeah. Do you believe that the way we ascertain truth about the paths, it has to do with a certain threshold of evidence?
No, I think that's bullshit. I think what you said is absolute nonsense. That is
Do you
actually
think
not
so?
how you ascertain truth, both either in your life and because okay, how about this? Let me push you this way. And so
Yeah,
why
yeah.
how do you know that the people who are presenting that evidence to you aren't lying, Jake? Have you seen the evidence
So we
yourself? Let me ask you that. Have you seen the evidence
Yeah,
yourself?
sure.
Did you hold the archaeological piece in your hand? Did you read the ancient manuscript?
No, but
You trust them, right?
but
You trust them?
I
You
could. Well,
you
yeah,
trust them.
yeah,
Well, that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
answer, man. The answer is trust. That's how
Okay,
it works. It actually
yeah,
it actually is held in trust. And so we have witnesses of things happening in the first century, witnesses that we trust, that I trust, and I trust those witnesses, and therefore I believe that it happened. So we have multiple
yeah. But
witnesses that have experienced
yeah,
something, and I trust that it happened. And I trust that it
got it.
happened
And
not because of the witnesses, but because of
yeah,
what it affords me. Because you're
right.
confusing things together. You're confusing a raw like evaluation of a fact or an
Hmm.
event and something which is not only a fact or an event like did you drop your pencil on the ground today and then
Yeah, yeah.
I could have filmed it or whatever, but we're talking about
Hmm.
something which is civilization affording, which is world
Yeah.
affording, which basically is at the origin of an entire world. And so and so
Yeah.
how can I say this? It's like,
Yeah.
let me ask you this. So let me ask you another a question that's related to this, which is that
Yeah.
so for let's say around 16, let's say around 1,000 years, at least 1,000 years,
Hmm.
right? Everybody
Hmm.
in Europe believes certain things to have happened,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
And then at some point, someone started to try to disprove that they happened. What is their
Yeah.
motivation?
To pursue truth, and if they find new information that proves it wrong, that they want to pursue truth and what's
And
real.
how could you do that about something that was witnessed by 12 people 2,000 years ago?
If you find evidence that so for example, if 12 people 2,000 years ago said, "Hey, we saw a person flying with angel wings," and then you're able to somehow disprove it, but it's hard to disprove that. I mean, people say a lot of crazy things, and so that's why the threshold for whether something is true is not whether 12 people said it; it's whether there's evidence
But
of
that's
it.
not how you live. That's such a lie. You're giving yourself
What do you
illusion of
mean?
the way that you exist. So how can you
What do you
prove
mean?
that
What do
your
you mean?
wife loves you?
But
How can
I'm
you
not.
prove
So
that
no, I
that
can't. No,
you
no, wait.
can't
So
prove the
let me.
things that the
Yeah.
world that you live in is not based, your world that you live in is based on trust, Jake. It is not based on
Right.
facts. The facts are not
His
accessible to you.
history, scientific reality, and history, I think,
Okay,
is
well,
based on facts. The way
scientific
my wife.
reality is not the gospel story and is not the Bible. The Bible is not a scientific document.
Mhm.
It doesn't try to be, doesn't pretend to be. All the ancient stories do not pretend to be scientific documents.
Ah.
They're not forensic descriptions of events, and they also don't have to
Mhm.
be because that's not the point. The point is not to convince, is not to in a forensic manner, predict
Mhm.
a phenomena the way that science
Yeah.
is able to 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 analyze and predict phenomena with like levels of facts that are necessary for that to happen. But that's not the world you live in. You don't live in that world.
Mhm. And by the way, I promise at half past the hour, I promise I'll switch topics. I don't want to be yet. I'm not going to win this argument,
Well, I
right?
mean,
This is
it's like
and if you had 6 hours, I'm not going to win this argument. And for 12 months of my life, uh, every single day for 12 months,
let me
I
let me
argued
let me
with,
push you even further on what you're saying. Is that
yeah. But I'll respond to. By the way, it's not. I'm just sorry for this tangent. Actually let me first just respond to what you're saying, because I don't mean to um call into question your beliefs, or I don't mean to say what you think is not important or real. Like let me take a step back and get on your side about a couple things. So I think there's tremendous value in religion. I think there's tremendous value in symbolism. I think it's hard to create a moral system in the world, and I think that having these stories and rituals is incredibly important. I think that there's like deep truth to these patterns and stories that repeat themselves. It says something deeper about us. And for those reasons, I think that holding whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam or a religion close to your heart and living in accordance with those principles is so valuable. That being said, let me respond to your question specifically. There's no scientific way to prove that my wife loves me. Maybe she doesn't, right? And I'm not saying that I can prove that. And you're right, day to day, I don't make decisions like I don't go through a scientific process to see like, oh, should I wear a raincoat? Is it definitely going to rain today? Like, no, we make decisions based off trust, and that's how we live our lives. Now, the reason we know that Mars is a planet next to the Earth, we don't go based on trust. We go based on a scientific process. The reason we know that George Washington was the first president, same thing. The reason I don't think that the stories of the Bible actually happened is for those same reasons. I don't think that we should use trust to ascertain reality in terms of history or scientific reality. I think with my wife loving me, I'm with you that I'm not going to try to prove that.
The difficulty you have is that the more you recede into the past, then it means that the more that you recede into the past, the less forensic descriptions will look necessarily. The way that descriptions of things that happened a very long time ago that we are capable of remembering today will necessarily look different because of the capacity we have to care and to remember and to attend. Because Pulp Fiction will be irrelevant to people in 100 years because they won't understand any of the references. They won't know maybe they won't even know what a gun is. They won't know they won't know anything about the details of what happens in Pulp Fiction because all their references will vanish. So if you want a story to be told in a manner that people remember and care, you have to tell it in a way that looks like a myth, not like forensic history. Forensic history is irrelevant over a long period of time. So what you're going to have to do is you're basically going to have to discount all things that are told before a certain period of time. And you're going to have to completely discount it because none of them are told in a way that is good enough for modern forensic analysis to ascertain its factuality.
Well, right. So if we found like for example, caveman drawings that showed a picture of people hunting a buffalo, we could say, wow, these people drew a picture of it. I don't know for sure that they hunted a buffalo, but like, why not? They had to eat. There were buffalo here. We see buffalo bones in North America.
Maybe they made it up.
Maybe they made it up.
They made up the other story.
But they might have made it up. I give it 50-50. I'd say 50% chance they hunted the buffalo. 50%. No, I'm dead serious. I'd say 50% chance they actually hunted elk, but they wanted to hunt buffalo and they drew a picture of it because it made them seem big and strong. And so 50% chance they hunted elk and drew a picture of a buffalo because it was a nice picture, and 50% chance that picture was a reflection of reality. And so based on that cave drawing, I could say, 50-50 because the activity they're describing holds true when we look at physics, right? Humans can hunt buffalo. Now, if they drew a picture of a UFO or if they drew a picture of something supernatural, I'd say, hold on a minute. Unlike the buffalo, which we know existed in North America around this time, we don't have as much evidence that, angels or demons existed in the same way we know that buffalo existed. So whatever percentage chance I think that the buffalo drawing happened, I'm going to give it 50%. The drawing of the angel or demon has got to be less than that. It has to be less than the buffalo drawing.
For example,
right?
so let's take angels and demons, for example, or gods, like say intermediary beings. So the fact that every single culture in the entire world, for the entire history that we know of, has stories of these beings, that is not sufficient for you to think that there's at least something to consider here.
I think I think that it's fascinating. Every human deep inside them believes has a longing for the infinite. It's a deeply human thing that we believe in a higher power. That's innate. That's totally, people need to believe in a life after death. So I think that's fundamental to human psychology. Absolutely.
And so it's reflective of a truth.
About human psychology,
Human psychology is not isolated from the world. It's not this thing that exists in a vacuum. It's this thing that exists in a microcosm, and it has to reflect that microcosm. Like human psychology is not something that just happened. It happened in relationship to the world. And so the idea that human psychology is completely divorced from the world
but not everything we believe and feel happens in
Well,
reality. So like it's deeply human to have a longing for other people and to believe in angels and demons and God and heaven. I think that's like deeply human intrinsic, but that doesn't mean that necessarily heaven exists as evidenced by the fact that we think it does.
the problem, it's like the problem is, again, it's if you think that heaven or angels exist at the level of animals, then you won't find any proof of them. Because you can't find proof. So if I want, it's like if I would say, I can't prove to you that truth exists. It's like, where's truth, buddy? Like, show me where truth is. Like, point to it. I want to know.
Truth is an
like,
abstract concept.
it's
No, but if you're talking about historical, if you're talking about physical,
well, angels are not physical things, and gods are not physical things, Jake.
So maybe we have a misunderstanding. Maybe we're not so far apart as I think. Because so here's where I agree with you, right? Like love, you can't prove love. Like it's in your heart, right? I believe that. Okay. I would never try to prove love. I would never try to prove truth as having objective truth. John Vervaeke and I talked about this yesterday with Zen Neoplatonism, the difference between like objective and subjective. Subjective things also have truth. The way you feel is a true thing, even though you can't point to it. You know, the space inside your head is a true thing. But the distinction I'm drawing is that if you're referring to physical things, like love and truth and space inside your head are not physical things. Consciousness is not a physical thing. Heaven and hell, angels and demon seem to me to be physical things. Like Jesus Christ was a physical. Jesus Christ,
physical things.
Jesus Christ and his resurrection.
Or no Christian or probably Jew or probably Muslim believes that angels are physical things. That's why we say they're spirits. That's why we say they're. That's why we say they're, they're intelligences. That's why we say.
But Jesus being born again, that's a physical thing. It's a physical person.
Clearly a physical being. That is for sure. Yeah. That is a different question than the existence of angels or demons. Angels or demons are not physical beings. They are agentic intelligences that act on us they act on us in ways that we recognize when we see the coherence of patterns that is acting on humans. So you can actually notice that everybody in America seems to think that America exists, but I can't point to it. Where's America?
Right. There is a border. But you're right. It's like it's an abstract thing.
An American who's not in America thinks he's an American.
I agree. It would be silly for me to try to prove the existence or absence of non-physical things, but I thought a lot of the supernatural things you're talking about are inherently physical.
That's a ridiculous idea. The idea that supernatural is physical, then why? What does that even mean? I don't even know what that would mean. What is a supernatural thing then?
Like the parting of the parting of the Red Sea, that would be physical. The resurrection of Christ would be physical. The talking serpent.
Miracles are events in the world for sure. But they're not, can I say this? They're not supernatural in the sense that they have to have happened in the world. So it's like, if something that we find difficult to explain happens, it has to have happened. Mm-hmm. And so the miracles are, how can I say this? Miracles are not just freak events. The best way to understand miracles is to understand that they are things happening in the world that are showing a level of meaning that is higher than the one we're used to seeing. And so it's you can use the analogy of strong emergence to understand what a miracle is that the constituent elements of the being do not account for the higher manifestation, right? So it's like there's nothing in hydrogen and oxygen that accounts for the qualities of water. So that's a miracle. That's a miracle. Because the water
talking serpent, that's physical, right?
Well, yeah, of course, the talking serpent is physical, but that's like you go into Genesis, man. That's a difficult one. Yeah. Like going into Genesis is a difficult one because that's an old story.
My only point, and hopefully my last point, because I hate to drag you into this, is my final point is we're both in agreement that it's silly for me to try to prove or disprove something non-physical like love or truth, anything like that. And then my point was, okay, but I think when it comes to physical things, events, people, history, then we're allowed to say things like, is this true or not? And then you were saying, well, angels and demons are not physical. What are you talking about? And so the point I'm trying to make now is that I'm referring specifically to pick whatever example you want, Jesus, serpent, whatever you want. When it comes to physical things, we're not talking about love anymore. We're talking about something physical. And I'm saying Maybe I've lost myself here, but you see what I'm saying? There's a distinction between like angels, demons versus is a physical thing that I'm
a
saying.
miracle. You're talking specifically about miracles.
If the
Right?
cavemen drew photos of people flying, I would
They
say
did. I'm
I'm
pretty
not
sure they did,
convinced.
by the way.
Yeah, and I would say I'm not convinced. They saw a bird, they had a rock, and they sketched it into the wall. Like we don't. Maybe there was a flying person, but my point is that drawing on the wall that ain't sufficient. Like
So
that
a
ain't not
caveman
sufficient.
draws humans like little
Yeah,
sticks,
yeah.
and then he draws a human. He draws a being flying in the air. You think
Would
it's
you
a
believe
forensic
anything?
description of you think it's a forensic description of a of a physical event, even though he draws humans like little sticks. Because you're not a little
What
stick,
I'm
by the
saying,
way. You know
do
that.
you believe everything the
My
caveman's gonna
goodness.
draw? You don't believe everything he's gonna. You don't believe everything he's gonna draw, right?
What does that even mean? What do you mean you don't
If a
believe
caveman,
everything that he draws? I don't understand his
because
question. It
a
seems like the
caveman can
purpose of
draw.
your life is to ascertain the factuality of things, which I guarantee you that is not the purpose of your life.
Oh
Like I guarantee you that the purpose of your life is not to ascertain the factuality of everything you encounter.
no, okay. If he and I keep saying oh, this is the final point because I. So if here's what I'm trying to say, you and I, John, I don't have to ask this question. I know that neither of us believe that everything a caveman drew necessarily happened in the physical reality, and you and I both believe that there is still importance to what he drew. Like there is still a fun truth to it. If he drew a buffalo flying, that says something true about what he was thinking and feeling and experiencing in the world. So there's truth to that, but it doesn't mean that there actually was a buffalo that did fly. And I think that distinction is important. Just rhetorically, I think it's important. Why is it so
I
funny?
just think that it's like, I think, how can I say this? And so, okay. So I think you and I live in two different worlds, like completely different worlds. It's pretty simple. If someone draws a buffalo flying, my
Yeah.
first question is why? That's my question. Is I'd
Right.
like to ascertain why he did that, what it means, why he cared enough about a buffalo flying to draw a buffalo flying. So what's
Yeah.
important is the meaning. I cannot
Yes.
ascertain what happened 10,000 years ago. I
Right.
have no way of doing that.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
why would I try to ascertain? What I'm interested in is what it means. And that's
Got
what's
it.
most
So
important.
maybe I misunderstood your whole point. I agree with you that it's important and that there's meaning behind him drawing a buffalo that's flying. Let me be really clear. I agree with you that that it says something about the person who drew it and his understanding of
So what do you
his
think it would
circumstance, the
mean
world.
to draw a buffalo flying?
I think it could say a lot. I don't know, but I have to think about it. But it definitely means something. It definitely means something about what he's thinking, what he's feeling. Maybe he sees the buffalo as being powerful or transcendent, or maybe he wishes the buffalo flew. Or I don't know, but it's not irrelevant. I think there's meaning, like you're
Yeah,
saying.
there is. And that's
Yeah,
it's far more important, let's say, than ascertaining the factuality of the thing, because
definitely.
it's like you're going to run into a wall nonstop,
I see.
like a nonstop wall in terms of
Yeah.
what it is that you want for your life. It's like,
Yeah. No, we have to value things based on and by the way, this might be a whole rhetorical argument. I agree that what people believe and draw and write is important. I think there's a lot of importance to the Bible. Maybe this distinction is not essential, but me saying, "Oh, I don't believe the stories actually happened," maybe doesn't prevent me from appreciating and learning from the stories and deriving significant value from it. Lots of people who practice Judaism, for example, don't take the stories literally, but they still gain tremendous value from the tradition, the culture, the history. And that's kind of the camp I see myself in personally, is like, and maybe you and I are not so far apart, where I don't disagree that there's a fundamental truth to depictions of these things. I just call into question whether they actually happened, but maybe that distinction doesn't matter. Like, who cares if it happened or not, because we can never prove it. And what matters was what it was intended by that depiction, right?
I mean, yeah, no,
I'm trying to
I
I'm trying to meet
understand what
you
you're
where
saying.
you
Okay,
are.
so let
Yeah.
me,
I'm trying to
yeah,
find
yeah, let
where your
me,
position is actually.
and so this is maybe where I find it, where how can I? Okay, so
Yeah.
when you describe an event, right, you're
Yeah.
always describing it for a purpose. Okay, right,
Uh-huh.
and so
Yeah.
the manner in which you describe it will change depending on the purpose that you have, and the way that you remember it will also
Mhm.
change depending on the purpose you have. So
Yeah.
the best thing to do with the Bible stories is to take what's
Mhm.
there. You just take what's
Mhm.
there. When
Yeah.
you as soon as people start to ask what really happened, okay, so what
Mhm.
really happened in Egypt? Did the Egyptians
Mhm.
did the Israelites really live as slaves in Egypt? And did they really? And so then what they end up doing, and you see it with like all these crazy
Mhm.
theologians, is they come up with like what really happened in history. And so now they're like, well, maybe the Israelites were a bunch of slaves that escaped from Egypt and like started this little civilization. So they have all
Mhm.
these theories about what could have really happened historically. And so
Yeah.
it's like, then you've lost why the story was written in the first place,
Yeah.
and
I
nobody
agree with
cares
but
about it.
John, but can't I say, like, let's say I'm a okay, and this is where we're going to be in agreement. Is like I should be able to say, "Hey guys, listen, I ain't trying to convince you whether this happened or not. What I'm trying to convince you is that there's a deep truth and importance to it, because I don't want to lose the 30% of people who are going to say, "Oh, if this didn't happen, I don't want to talk about it." I want to tell them, "Listen, don't worry about whether this happened or not. There is there's importance to the stories and to the Bible, and forget about. I guess I'd rather say let's forget about whether it historically happened or not, and let's focus on the meaning of it rather than trying to convince people that it did happen in reality. And I think you'd agree, because I think what you're saying is that it doesn't
I
matter
mean,
as much whether
can I say this? Like, it does matter to some extent because of
yeah
the idea that it's not someone who sat around and made up the story, right? That the
yeah
story
yeah
is handed down and remembered,
yeah
and that it signifies, let's say, the origin of your people. So, like a good example would be the parting of the Red Sea, right?
yeah
Passover, right? It's like you say, well, it didn't happen, right? There isn't really Passover. Like this is just someone made that up, you know? And so I just want to warn you that that's a very dangerous act to do, it's a very dangerous direction to go when Passover is the foundation of your religion.
a lot of
I'm
Jews, I
sure
think I can say this
that
and not get in trouble. A
a
lot
lot of
of
very
Jews that don't believe in it
sophisticated
literally.
Jews, they don't believe that it happened. But one of the problems is that they believe that the only things that happen are things that can be forensically described.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me, because I keep wanting to respond, but let me transition, John, back to the first question I
Yeah.
asked. Try to redeem your impression of me in the next 16 minutes, and before I ruin your day completely.